Hey, everyone, and welcome back to Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. I hope your holidays were great and that you're well into having a wonderful new year. One of the truly rewarding things for me personally about the predator investigations, and we just shot another one December 20th. I'll have more information on that soon, is that I've been able to meet a lot of people who are very involved in organizations, who have formed organizations to educate kids and families and help kids avoid falling into the trap of people involved with grooming and human trafficking and being targeted by predators. One of the reasons that we started the podcast, Predators I've Caught, a year ago, is because during the pandemic, you had more kids online than ever before in an environment where there are more social platforms than ever before upon which predators can approach children, vulnerable children. And this happens, and we know that. We know that statistically from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. And along the way, I was fortunate enough to meet Kelly Litvak, who is the founder of Childproof America. And Childproof America is having a conference, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Kelly's going to join us. And in Houston, coming up this weekend, specifically Saturday, January 15th. And it's something that you guys need to check out. It's really important. I'm going to be one of the speakers at the conference, along with a lot of other people who have a lot of expertise in this area. And I want to welcome Kelly right now to the show. Kelly, how are you this evening?
I'm very good. Thank you, Chris, so much for having me tonight.
Well, I appreciate you being here. And again, thank you for the invite to be involved in the conference coming up in Houston. I think these things are so important. And as much as I try to give my experience, in 17 years of confronting predators, investigating predators, taking people inside this world, I get just as much out of it speaking. And part of the reason is sometimes these organizations are born from personal experience, which is the case with Childproof America. Your daughter, from a great home, great school, wonderful life, was actually groomed and lured into this online predatory world. She's great now, thank God. But this got you started down the path which created Childproof America. It's an amazing story. Tell me how this all got going.
So, Chris, for a decade, I actually worked in prison ministry with very high-risk youth. I wrote a book for teens and really how to navigate teen issues. And that was my love. That was my calling for a decade. So it would seem very unlikely that my own child would perhaps fall victim to crime because she had a mom that talked about avoiding criminal activity for all of her life, mostly. But unfortunately, it was a season of great trauma for my daughter, which led her to be put on the radar of other students at her school that identified her as vulnerable and took advantage of that and slowly started to reach out to her and build a friendship and build trust. And that would seem very normal, right? In high school, people are meeting each other, they're inviting each other to parties, and it seems very unthreatening. But in reality, she was identified through the different rumors going through the school about the season she was going through, the things she was posting on social media, which were maybe, not dramatic, like pictures of her like doing bad stuff, but maybe the tone in her voice and the downcast attitude that she was having in that season. And that put her on the radar of other students in her school. And there began a very, very devastating journey for our family.
Well, I can only imagine what that was like, but I'm just so glad that it all worked out. And I think the outcome of this, which is Childproof America, has clearly done so much outreach and created so much awareness and so much dialogue that perhaps didn't exist before, which has been the goal of all the predator investigations and continues to be. What do you want people to know most about the upcoming conference, and what do you achieve? What do you want to achieve when you bring all these people together? Folks like me, survivors of predatory behavior and human trafficking, people in law enforcement, people who are on the front lines of this. What's the goal here, Kelly?
Yes, that's a great question. So, Chris, I do a lot of education, a lot of public speaking, and it's effective, but this epidemic is growing at such a fast pace that reaching 100 and 200 people at a time is very good, but we need to cast our net wide, and we need to not only cast our net wide reaching a vast audience, but we need to bring to the table experts who can speak from very different vantage points. So if you look at our roster for what is going to be happening this weekend, specifically on Saturday, you will see a very diverse group of compelling speakers, because we need to understand this issue from a survivor's perspective, a buyer's perspective, and we need to understand this from a kind of a mental health issue perspective. So I'm so excited because my goal is to have people walk away from this summit to say, oh my gosh, I get it. I understand this. I understand the survivor. I understand the buyer. I understand the trauma component of this, because I can speak on a lot of things like the who, what, where, when, and why, the fundamentals of this issue. But I can't speak on the perspective, Chris, that you can with the work that you've done, the history that you've done from the buyer or the predatory perspective. And then we're bringing in a medical team that can speak on the mental health component, the trauma bonding, and all those complexities that I am not an expert in other than what I've walked through myself. But we need to understand what keeps a victim loyal to their predator. And that's kind of like domestic violence. We say to ourselves, well, why doesn't the wife just leave her husband? Why doesn't XYZ leave her abuser? It's so hard for us to understand
Why
that.
doesn't the child just log off and stop talking to the adult, the predator?
But
it's interesting because, and you and I have had this discussion, Kelly, but 17 plus years ago, 18 next month, we did the first investigation. We merely had decoys in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo.
Yes.
Today, we've got Kik and the dating apps, which are abused by predators. We've got TikTok and so many different platforms, the interactive video games, which we see used in a lot of cases. And all these years later, I'm in a kitchen on December 20th, and in one evening, 4 guys walk in to meet a teenage girl, up to and including an engineer for a major company.
Yes.
And it doesn't end. So my point has always been in these things that when you look at a crime, say you look at drugs, we talk about treating addiction as a disease and how do we accomplish demand reduction. We don't have an effective way of accomplishing demand reduction in this crime because it's so multifaceted. So my argument has always been that the best defense is awareness and having this healthy dialogue, and you protect your children on the front line at the family dinner table. Mm-hmm. And there are other elements to this, but I think, the more that this is discussed, the more that it's out there, the better off children are.
You're right. And I want to talk about the demand disruption, because the demand is driving, trafficking. If there wasn't demand, we would not have supply. So this is such a complex issue. What I have learned since becoming an advocate and a frontline warrior on this issue is that it starts many, many years ago when the young person has such easy access to pornography, to online pornography. The age that a child is first exposed to pornography on average is age 8. So we see with the use of cell phones and social media and everything, kids can just access pornography with one simple click. So that sets them on a course of this very unhealthy mindset of sexuality, which ultimately leads to them wanting a little bit more and ultimately being a buyer for another human being. So I believe it's a process that takes them from point A to point Z. But it's absolutely incredible that that individuals who exploit people for sex are willing to risk job, marriage, family, reputation, everything. Just like what we saw in your work previously, Chris,
And
is
and I'll take you one step further,
yes,
and we've reported on this here on Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. We have now situations where mothers, parents of young women, are exploiting their children on YouTube and other social media platforms for profit.
yeah,
Sexual exploitation. And it's shocking that some of the platforms, YouTube included, are not doing more to monitor this situation.
yes. Well, and we did see the Sesta Fosta Act pass when President Trump was in office, and that was really holding big tech accountable. And that was a big move, and that's what took down Backpage.
Hmm.
But and following Backpage was all the other smaller tech companies that were hosting sexually explicit ads online, open and public for anybody to access. But that bill was very effective in holding big tech accountable. But when there's money, there's going to be people that kind of find a way to get through the loopholes and find a way around it. And that's what we're seeing. So interestingly enough, when Backpage was taken down, a lot of that activity turned to one of the biggest platforms that our youth use, and that's Instagram.
Sure. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and you know the whole work of being a decoy, you going in, you're saying you're a younger person. Well, that was the case when Backpage went down, that there was law enforcement in those social media platforms that within seconds of them coming into the room, they were approached by a predator. And so, what's the answer, Chris? What is the answer? Number one, it is educating our families and communities, not being afraid to talk about this issue. It's a very tough issue. We don't want to talk about people buying sex from children. Nobody wants to talk about that. But what we really don't want to talk about is your child's missing for 2 years because you were not proactive. And now you're being forced to be in a reactive state. We need education. We need to have harsh penalties for offenders. So in Texas, for instance, it has become a felony to purchase a person for sex. So that just passed like in the last several months. So we need to have harsh penalties for offenders. And we need to, in my opinion, Chris, at the end of the day, we need to go to the root cause. The root cause. Why can a person and how can a person exploit another human being for money? That goes back to my days in prison ministry and working with a lot of youth with fatherless homes. That is a very key component to the trafficker side, and the trafficker becoming so desensitized to exploiting and hurting a human because they have not been given that fostering of love and care. So that's the exploiter side. That is the trafficker side. And then we have the access to pornography. Then we have COVID. So it's kind of like a perfect storm. But it doesn't mean we throw our hands in the air and say, we're just overwhelmed. We're just defeated. No, we're not defeated.
Well, it reminds me of the story of Alicia Kozak, who I'm sure you're familiar with, who was, groomed online and
Yes.
lured out in a area of Pittsburgh, upper middle class area, and
Yes.
was actually chained in a basement
Yep.
by her captor. And, because he live streamed it, somebody reported it to the FBI and she was rescued. And she has become, a nationally renowned advocate, and she and I serve on some boards together. But you don't want to believe that something so horribly tragic can happen to any child,
Yes.
and whether they're in a lesser economic situation or a more affluent situation. But it does happen, and these are not stories that we tell people to shock them for ratings or clicks or
Right.
views. It really happens every day, and what frightens me is what we don't know about. And I was on the phone having a conference with a assistant district attorney on the West Coast just two days ago about the increased number of predatory contacts reported and child pornography reported across all platforms has gone up significantly from 2020 to 2021,
Yes.
and it's alarming. And when we talk about, for instance, end-to-end encryption, which some of the most popular social media platforms are looking to do, that would eliminate a lot of this monitoring. So there are multiple issues in front of us, and I look forward to digging into these at the conference in Houston. How can people tune into this? We're going to post the link for the live stream here on Have a Seat with Chris Hansen, but for people who are interested, who obviously aren't going to be able to get to Houston for any number of reasons, including COVID, what's the best way for them to tune in, Kelly?
Very simple. Go to our website, childproofamerica.org. Right there on the homepage, there are two buttons. There's one to click if you want to purchase a ticket for in person, if you're in the Houston area. There's another button to push if you want to access the live stream. Very simple. You can access the live stream through Crowdcast. It's a $25 registration fee, and you have access to the entire summit, which is this Saturday from 12:30 to 6:30 Central Standard Time. I cannot express, Chris, enough. This is a must-see education outreach. We need to equip our communities, our states, our nation with this education to not instill fear, but to empower, to be proactive in this epidemic that is sweeping across our nation. Chris, did you know, and I'm sure you do because you are in the same work, that sex trafficking is the number one fastest growing criminal enterprise in the country? It is tied with illegal arms trade. This is not a trend. This is not, something that we need to ignore. This is serious. It's in our upscale communities. It's our inner cities. It is online. It is in our schools. So to underestimate the threat is to mark ourselves as vulnerable. And whenever I get ready to talk, I tell my audience, and you can just tell they're grasping, they're just bracing themselves to be fearful. And I tell everybody, it's a scary, scary subject we're going to talk about, but the goal for us is to not instill fear, but to promote empowerment.
Well, that's exactly right. And the other element that I've had to get my arms around is it's not just the leading criminal enterprise in the world today, human trafficking. It's an integral part of every criminal enterprise, whether it's terrorism, the drug trade, arms sales, you name it. There's a human trafficking component in every single crime around the world
Yes.
as we speak.
Yes.
It's a piece of everything. And so it becomes even broader in terms of a battle against these. And I get involved in a lot of different organizations who are, we did the Peter Nygaard investigation,
Yes.
several others, and it comes in all different kinds of forms, and it's ubiquitous. So it's even more important. Kelly, is there anything else you want folks to know going into this very important event in Houston?
Yes. I would say that the biggest piece of advice that I can give to parents and grandparents, caregivers that are blessed with youth in their care, is to not underestimate the commitment that a predator has once he has the target, or her has the target, because it's traffickers are male and female. Once they have the target in their sights, do not underestimate the commitment they have to achieve their goal, and that is to exploit their target. That is the biggest piece of advice. The second is, and this is me, Chris, this is me. I had the attitude of, oh, never my child. Never, ever my child. I have raised my child to understand stranger danger. I've raised her to keep herself safe in any environment. That is how I raise my child, especially with my background being in juvenile justice. So to adopt an attitude of not my kid is really dangerous, because it can happen to any family, anywhere, in any environment. So we need to say, okay, this could happen to my child, and very unintentionally. It can be more than kind of the typical grooming and whatnot. It can be somebody dropping GHB in your drink that's a bottled water at a party where it's so innocent. And that can be the avenue to someone exploiting your child. So, remove any kind of idea that this could not happen to your family, and remove any idea that this is like the movie Taken, that this is a kidnapping and abduction. That does happen, but it's such a small percentage, probably less than 2%.
Exactly. Well,
So,
Kelly, thank
yeah,
you for all of that. And I look forward to seeing you in Houston. Anybody who's watching this will be able to get the link right here on the show. And as Kelly mentioned, it's pretty straightforward. So we encourage you to join us remotely to experience what we're going to be putting together, what Childproof America, what Kelly Litvak has put together. And I got to tell you, the dedication that you personally put into this is motivating to me, and I just know how much hard work this is for you, and I know that between now and when I see you this weekend, you have just innumerable amounts of things to accomplish. So I'm going to let you go, but I appreciate, Kelly, everything you do, and I appreciate being a part of this. And thanks for being on the show.
thank you. Thank you so much, Chris. I look forward to seeing you this weekend, and let's make a huge difference in our community, our nation. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right, Kelly. And this is one of those great organizations that you really need to pay attention to and support in any way you can. And I'm sure going to do that as well. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Have a Seat with Chris Hansen. We will see you very soon with another show. And remember, you can always check out the Predators I've Caught podcast on all podcast platforms. A new episode just dropped last night, as a matter of fact. Take care. I'll be watching and listening.